did nothing wrong.
Yeah, we did. He was supposed to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves.
Greek or Hebrew text, they have to do with how those texts were translated. So, for example, if you look at Acts chapter 5, verse 30, write these down. If you want to look at them quickly, that's great. But in Acts chapter 5, verse 30, the King James Version says, "The God of our fathers raised up Jesus, whom ye slew and hanged on a tree." Now, the New King James, which is translating the Textus Receptus as well, has, "The God of our fathers raised up Jesus, whom you murdered by hanging on a tree." Well, that is what happened. Jesus was crucified, and that was the means by which he was put to death. They didn't kill him and then hang his body on a tree. The Legacy Standard Bible says, "The God of our fathers raised up Jesus, whom you put to death by hanging him on a tree." And so it's obvious that the participle that is used here is describing the means, not a separate action, but the means by which the main verb is accomplished. Now, the King James translators were really focused on Latin. They were experts in Latin first and foremost.
Okay, so we're going to stop it there, folks, because there's a lot to unpack here. Again, we are Monday night quarterbacking Brother James White, and some of you mentioned in the comments you're not so much interested in what Brother White thinks or says anyway. I understand that, but there are a lot of people out there who do think a lot of what Brother James White says and thinks. And so my perspective on this, and you don't have to agree with me, but my perspective is that many of Brother White's positions, comments, and statements, especially relating to the King James Version, should not go unchecked or unchallenged. So bear with me, okay? Acts chapter 5, verse 30, the King James Version, again, we'll quote it again. "The God of our fathers raised up Jesus, whom ye slew and hanged on a tree." And the Textus Receptus reading, we'll hold it up here. "Hat Theos ton pateron, hemon, egiron, yesun hon, humais de ek I ris seste, cremasentes," and that's the participle in question here, epe xulu. Okay? Now, James White does admit here that it's not the underlying Greek text that he is calling into question, as he shouldn't, because Alan Metzger and his Greek text is lockstep with the Textus Receptus here. Codex Vaticanus is lockstep with the Textus Receptus here. And there are earlier English translations, in fact, that translate the same way into English that the King James Version translators translated this verse. Tyndale's 1534 is exact with the King James Version. Cranmer's 1539, identical with the King James Version. The Geneva Bible, 1557, is identical with the King James Version here. So, folks, first I think it's important to understand what a Greek participle is. A Greek participle is a verbal adjective. It can serve several functions, both adjectively and adverbally. It all depends on how it is used, and again, the big C word, context, 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 how it is used contextually. Aorist and perfect participles indicate action antecedent, are you listening to the action of the main verb? And we have an aorist participle here. Thus, the chronology, or the precise order of the incidents or events here is immaterial. Because there are myriads, folks, myriads of places that you all are aware of as well in our Bibles where the exact chronological sequence of events is not followed from statement to statement. This point of Brother White's is, once again, pointless. Example, in the very same passage, if you read it, the very same verse, Acts chapter 5, verse 30, first states that God, in so many words, raised up Jesus. Which happened first? Well, Peter is not saying in this order these events took place. That's not what he's saying. In fact, Peter gives the exact opposite order. Read what the verse says. First, Jesus is raised up, then he's slain, then he's hanged. But we all know that he was hanged first, slain second, and raised up third. And so it's not the precise order in this statement that makes it either true or untrue. The statement can still be true. He's just given them in reverse order. That's all. All right, so what we have here is an aorist active participle, nominative masculine plural. That's the type of participle that we have here. Remember what a participle is. It is a verbal adjective. So it has elements of a verb. It has aorist active, which is tense and voice. And then it also has an inflection similar to a noun. It's a nominative masculine plural. Now, they're going to get into a little bit of Greek grammatical stuff. It's going to seem kind of boring to those of you who haven't studied Greek. But hang with us. We're going to try to land safely onto the tarmac. Okay, Brother White and those of his school of thought translate this participle as an instrumental participle, as you heard him say, which is when a participle indicates the means by which the action of the main verb is accomplished. But folks, there are several ways of translating a Greek participle depending on what is called, again, contextual analysis. And yes, context is important in the Greek language as well as in the English language. All right, some other ways to translate a Greek participle are, for example, in a modal sense, which is when a participle emphasizes the manner in which the action of the main verb is accomplished. An example of that is found in Matthew chapter 3, verse 1. In those days came John the Baptist. How did he come? Preaching in the wilderness. The manner in which the action of the main verb took place, not instrumental. Another way to translate the Greek participle is in a complementary sense, which is when the participle is used to complete the idea of the action of the main verb. An example of this is in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 16. I, Paul is speaking, cease not to give thanks for you. So in this sense, the participle completes the idea of the action of the main verb. And then next, the King James translators thoroughly understood the Greek language. The King James translators chose to translate this participle as a circumstantial participle, which is when a participle merely expresses an attendant circumstance, an additional fact or thought, which is best rendered in English by the conjunction and. Thus, the fact that the Greek text doesn't seem to match the English here is irrelevant in this case, because this is one of those idioms which have no exact parallel from the Greek to the English. And so, folks, the King James translators used what was called the circumstantial sense of the participle. And the King James translators, again, were very, very familiar and experts, many of them, in the Greek language. We'll get into more of that in a minute. But we have to express the English idiom, folks, to communicate to English-speaking people what the English Bible is going to say. And the correct way here is not to translate this participle as by, as Brother White has suggested, in the instrumental sense. It is, in fact, a circumstantial participle. And you can document this in Dana and Manty's Manual Grammar of the Greek New Testament, which, by the way, just happened to be the principal text, one of the principal texts that we used at Liberty University studying Greek under Dr. James Frederickson. And so the King James translators translated this passage correctly, and they were very well versed in the Greek language and many others. Okay, we might find additionally interesting. This is a quote from Dana and Manty, a Manual Grammar of the Greek New Testament, page 220. The extent of participial usage in the New Testament varies with different authors in accordance with their literary training and taste. Luke shows the greatest fondness for the participle, particularly in the book of Acts. How about that? Imagine that. The very author and the very book in question here. Again, page 220, a Manual Grammar of the Greek New Testament, Dana and Manty. Brother White tries to sell the idea that the King James translators were not as proficient in Greek Hebrew and other languages as they were in Latin. You just heard him say that. Well, I'm not so certain exactly which translators Brother White is referring to, folks, because he doesn't seem to be at all that well versed on those guys who were actually doing the translating. Facts. John Boyce, a King James Version translator, at 5 years of age read the Bible through in Hebrew. By the time he was 6 years old, Boyce would write Hebrew legibly and in an elegant manner. Boyce also learned to read Greek as a young man in college. You can document this in McClure's Translators Revived. Dr. Lancelot Andrews, a King James Version translator, acquired most of the languages of Europe during the 1500s, as well as mastering a number of Oriental languages. Dr. Hadrian Saravia, a King James Version translator, one of the King James Version translators, commanded several languages, including Hebrew. Not so sure that they were mainly focused on Latin. It's not sounding like that so far, is it, folks? Jeffrey King, a King James Version translator, was the Regius Professor of Hebrew. Regius Professor of Hebrew at Cambridge University. Doesn't sound like Latin to me. Now, don't get me wrong. Many of them, in addition to these languages, were very fluent in Latin as well. Lawrence Chatterton, a King James Version translator, was thoroughly skilled in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin, not just Latin. What he's trying to do is sell ice to an Eskimo, folks. He's trying to sell the fact, or the belief, I shouldn't say fact. Brother White's trying to sell the belief that the King James Version translators were not proficient in any other language other than Latin. And then this would then hold to his narrative that the King James Version translators were not really qualified to translate from any of the Greek texts, and then would thus result in us not having an accurate English translation. But of course, we all know that we actually do. William Bedwell, a King James Version translator, published an Arabic edition of John's epistles along with a Latin version. Did you hear that? Fluent in Arabic, proficient in Arabic, as well as Latin. Bedwell personally tutored a renowned Orientalist, Dr. Pocock. Bedwell was reputed as being an eminent Oriental scholar. Doesn't sound like Latin to me, Brother White. Edward Lively, a King James Version translator, was King's professor of Hebrew and is remembered as being, listen to this, one of the best linguists in the world. And of course, we're going back to the 1500s, late 1500s, early 1600s. So it appears Brother White is attempting to sell peanuts to a peanut farmer, folks. Brother White is playing checkers, and some of us are playing three-dimensional chess. That being said, folks, trust and believe your KJV. It is part of God's preservation process. It is given by inspiration, as is all Scripture. Have a blessed day. Lehitraot, until we meet again. Shalom Aleichem. Peace be to all of you.